Now we will begin with our second panel of this Congress. So without further ado, let me please introduce our distinguished panel of speakers. First, we have Sarah Singh. She is a former financial services and management consulting professional, and she currently develops and leads NASPERS and process policy, strategic, and government initiatives across a full range of areas that impact NASPER process and technology in the region. Sarah here? Just making sure that we have our speakers here with us.
Yeah, they're there. You go ahead.
So as I name you, just please take your seat. The second speaker is Gita Rollins, the head of unit of the Multinational Enterprises and Enterprise Engagement Unit at the International Labor Organization. Her current position concentrates on providing policy advice and technical assistance to firms, governments, and workers with a strong focus on corporate social responsibility and the SDGs. Joshua Wycliffe, the Chief Operating Officer at the International Solar Alliance. Joshua also holds a position as a permanent secretary at the government of Fiji. He is responsible for a wide array of projects in areas such as the environment, housing, urban development, and local governance.
Well done.
Joshua, if you're here, please do join us on stage.
Yeah, you can take this.
Our fourth speaker is Cécile Pilot, the head of unit of the Microeconomic Analysis, Investment, Climate, Private Sector, and Trade and Employment at the European Commission. Cécile has been working for the European Commission for more than 15 years and has a well-rounded expertise in areas of health, economy, trade, and climate. Welcome, Cécile. Natasha Santos, the Vice President and Head of Global Stakeholders Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Bayer Crop Science. Natasha's team develops engagement policies grounded on transparency and integrity, aiming to achieve measurable environmental and social positive impact at scale. Nitin, I think you have a full house of women here. I leave the microphone to you.
Jenny.
Oh, yeah. We have
Jenny Chase.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think I have
Sorry,
her
this is Jenny Chase,
here.
my colleague from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. So she is the expert on solar industry. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you can see, that the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 of gender equality, we managed to crack it today. So we have 4 and 2 on the stage. So genuinely, we have a true representation of men on the, the main stage. So I'm very happy about that. So in the spirit, gents first this time, because we have only one from that gender. So I think the way we are going to actually look at it, I'm just going to set some context in terms of numbers of what's happening around the world, and then we will take the conversation forward. So let me set the context. When we look at that, certain numbers I would like to share. So we are in the year 2022. And exactly the halfway mark in the decade of action to meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 2030, and we are like almost 8 years into that. With just 4 years into the project, 2 major events occurred back to back, and we all know that. And the world, which was already struggling with patchy progress in meeting some of the Sustainable Development Goals, saw the progress either slowed down, in some cases halted, and the world has, in many cases, has experienced a pullback in some of the critical gains we have made in the first 4 years itself. So to share some numbers, which I picked up from the UN, 225 million full-time jobs were lost due to pandemic. Women have been affected by employment losses to greater extent than men. Human Development Index, critical indicator, declined for the first time since its introduction in last 2-3 years. Extreme poverty estimates had to be revised upward after a long time. FDI fell by 42%, with Europe and North America recording the steepest decline in goals relevant sector is of particular concern in developing and least developing countries. And the UN estimate, when in 2015, when we launched the initiative, the funding was to the extent of $2.25 trillion to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we look around with the global economy, especially in the developed world, where we are looking at some kind of a possible slowdown and recession, and which is also a main source of FDI to the world, we are going to see not only increase in the SDG funding requirement of 4.5 trillion, but also slow down in terms of what the money will be available on the table from the developed world because of the economic crisis we see everywhere. So given this context, I thought it will be a good time for us to take a pause to understand what each one of us from a different background and institution we represent, what we are doing with special focus to the initiatives the investment agencies care about. And then we look at assessing what has worked, what can be done better, so that we can actually look forward in terms of accelerating the progress because we have very short time left. And after losses, there's a much more urgency to accelerate the process. So the discussion will revolve around three parts. So we'll take a pause to understand what's happening, and we will assess what has worked and what is need to improve, and then how can we accelerate largely from the funding side so that without money we will not be able to much progress. So the third part will focus on the funding to accelerate the process. So that will be the quick background on that. So Joshua, let me start with you, and then we can go from from our left side. Is with your opening remarks, International Solar Alliance as being playing a key role in terms of SDG 7 and 13 in the clean energy and environment. So we would like to hear from you as to what your firm is doing, which can be linked back to the work the investment professional agencies care about. So over to you.
Thank you, Nitin. At the outset, let me thank and extend my gratitude for inviting me to this session on impact FDI and sustainability, enhancing the impact of FDI and linking projects with SDGs. That's exactly what we stand for. And as a part of WAIPA's World Investment Conference 2022, it is a great privilege and an honor to be here to provide my opening remarks. In this day and age where energy transitions for fighting against climate change is seen also in the light of adoption towards solar and solarizing, the world is presently witnessing a major transition in the energy sector with dynamic changes on both the supply side as well as the demand side. And the dynamics, although in this transition have different, take a different dimension in different countries, what we are witnessing, both externally and within the International Solar Alliance, is the impact of certain commonalities or common factors, which include the need to drive economic growth. And we just heard you, Nitin, say the number of jobs that were lost due to the pandemic, and further driving the economic growth, especially within smaller and development states, and also least developed countries. And so the need to drive growth, the need to move away from traditional income generating industries and segments, and also the need to meet the demand of growth in population, and also the trend in urbanization, and also the recent interest in protecting environment and the awareness of environment protection. All of these are common threads across various countries in their quest for transitioning to within the energy sector. And like you said, the past decade has set a strong initial momentum to transform the energy systems for the decades ahead. So the energy transition towards net zero economy and the ambitions that globally countries are putting forward, and the International Solar Alliance's commitment to be part of supporting its member states in being able to achieve their ambitions. These have all been hot topics of discussion both within ISA and in our actions and our action plans, working with the various nations that we work with. And of course, adoption of solar energy systems by these countries has been recently of prime importance. And like I said, in this scenario, solar power continues to be one of the lowest costs and the most economic solutions for adding generation capacities to cater both for on-grid and off-grid demand. the solar sector enjoyed in 2021 alone as another record year, nearly 191 gigawatts of new solar capacity additions. And the recent growth has been driven to a large extent by policies, laws, regulations that encourage investments in the sector. A recent exemplar has been in the Pacific, two banks investing into jobs for nature, in being able to provide jobs and provide investments towards having nature-based solutions through solarizing some of the issues that they have within remote island states as well. While all this is happening, the world has seen a 27% increase in energy transition investment across various technologies in 2020-2021, with global investments reaching a record high of $755 billion. However, what ISA finds is that the mobilization of investments earmarked for energy transition has been skewed towards developing nations. And this also holds for investments, especially for the investments earmarked for solar adoption across the world. Despite the benefits and the pressing need for accelerated adoption of solar systems, there has not been a uniform deployment of solar technologies across the globe. And this is evident from the fact, for example, Africa has installed 0.9 gigawatts only in the year 2021. That would represent more like a 0.5% of the new global installed capacity. So Africa accounts for only 1.3% of the global installed capacity, despite having nearly 600 million people in population within the population that do not have access to electricity. This ISA finds as a result, the refuting the notion that countries with high technical potential for RE adoption shall be a benefit to the most and lead in the race of renewable adoption as a whole.
Yeah.
This is supported by the historical trend of solar energy investments, which have been disproportionately low when it has come to Africa, with the continent receiving only 4% of global power sector investment. And this is for the year 2020, despite having some of the richest solar resources in the world that we see today. So that ISA finds and works towards a need for a revised approach for mobilizing investments towards solar adoption.
Yeah.
With the expansion of PV applications to mini-grids, standalone systems, solar home systems, and various other off-grid applications, like solar desalination, there's a huge untapped potential for solar expansion while ensuring electricity access and helping in the transformation of developing and undeveloped nations, including smaller and development states. A clear exemplar I'd like to point out that ISA is involved is providing sustainable agriculture in small and development states that traditionally have always wanted or depended upon tourism, some of these coastal, smaller and development states, to wean them out of that as a depending business, but to move away towards agriculture.
Yeah.
So ISA is involved in some of these areas where they're able to solarize agriculture.
Joshua,
I wasn't sure how long you had for me to speak.
Yeah, I think on the funding side, we will come back because that is my third part of the conversation. So if you don't mind, we will revisit that on the third part. And I think I will, go ahead with the panelists to get their works and their views on the work which they are doing. I think the labor market has been severely impacted with the pandemic and all the crisis. And I think that must have actually taken a lot of gains which we have made in first 3-4 years back. So please share the works which ILO is doing, which links back to the IPAs and the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting, again, the International Labour Organization to participate in this discussion, specifically on impact investment. And I think this is really the topic of this session. And you may know the International Labour Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations. We have 187 member states across the world. And of course, our mandate is really the promotion of decent work, and decent work as an important means to achieve social justice. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, decent work is a very specific Sustainable Development Goal, namely Sustainable Development Goal 8, and that is combined with inclusive economic growth. And as you pointed out, over the past years, I mean, since the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, the world has changed tremendously through a number of changes, including in the labor market. You mentioned, of course, the loss of employment, how women have been specifically impacted. But also we see a rise in child labor, we see a rise in forced labor. We just came out this week with a report on forced labor, the increase. So it's clearly that inequalities in the world have been on the rise over the past years due to several crises. You know, of course, there is the pandemic, but there are other crises ongoing. And in a way, what COVID has done is, in a way, exacerbated existing inequalities in the world. And I think that's why it's even more important to really focus on impact investment. For the ILO, investment and trade is a very important vehicle to contribute to decent work and to inclusive economic growth. And we've adopted a number of specific tools, I would say, to work together with governments, employers, workers, specifically enterprises also, in stimulating the positive contribution that business can bring to decent work, including, inclusive economic growth, you know, through their own operations, through their supply chains, because we've seen that, of course, this link or the positive or the benefits from investment for inclusive economic growth are not automatic. They require certain policies from the government, but also responsible business practices from investors. And that really, the way we work on the SDGs, the way we work on investment was also the basis for our partnership with WAIPA. And I do want to highlight the very close collaboration we have with WAIPA and a very successful collaboration we've had with WAIPA since 2016, because we really found each other in the context of the SDGs, I should say, because WAIPA, with its members, IPAs, was clearly seeing how the SDGs, in a way, were a different way of looking at investment, and of course wanted to partner also with the ILO, specifically on SDG 8. And as you mentioned, you know, reflection on what we've been doing before we then start talking about, you know, what are some of the challenges and how we need to scale up. I think over the past year, since 2016, we've been working with IPAs, you know, doing capacity building on how to better incorporate SDG 8 into investment attraction, investment facilitation, to closer link precisely the investment attraction to national development priorities, the SDG priorities in the country, but then specifically decent work priorities, more and better jobs, linkages with national enterprises. We've been facilitating exchanges of experiences. And more recently, we've conducted also a survey with WAIPA among IPAs on what is needed to accelerate action in this area. And I think I will keep, you know, some of the outcomes of this survey for the second part in our discussion.
Yeah, and also I encourage everybody to actually have a deep dive into the report, because it's quite an interesting report, the survey report they have come up with. So in preparation, it really helped me when I actually looked at that. You know, so now let me move to Cecile. From your perspective, I think the inclusion is something which, you know, you are looking very closely at, and because that is a very big challenge which we saw earlier also. So why don't you share the works which your organization is doing, which link back to some of the SDG goals, and also the work which the IPAs are doing?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I think this is very important now that we are here. I'm coming from the European Union, the European Commission, and the department in charge of development cooperation, which is called now International Partnership. And it's not because we wanted to change the name, but because it's something very meaningful in the way we want to also deploy our support to partner country and official development aid in a way that is working really with private sector and along investment. So very important to talk today to the IPAs, because it is really with the investment and fostering and supporting the investment that we will see many of the SDG being, I mean, Gita was talking about the decent work, but also, of course, the green dimension. The Green Deal is very, very important for us in the EU, but also a digitalization and so on that comes together if we have investment which are sustainable and we try to support this increase of investment in our partner country. What do we have as a tool to do that? We have been already deploying some tools like blending and guarantees. It's really to sort of leverage private investment and to work really closely with DFI, so Development Financial Institution. We have already new program, and we will accelerate that. We are accelerating that already, and we will in the next futures. We have a specific tool which is called EFSD Plus. It's a special fund for sustainable development investment. And along, we just before the summer issued a call for proposal to all the DFIs, and it is really along 5 windows, but really the sectors of energy, very important, agriculture, digital, health, and also sustainable finance and SMEs. So it's 6, sorry, I forgot one. So also SMEs, because there is really a lot of growth that we can get also from the SMEs. But basically, this is with tools like this, which we think we can really sort of accompany the public-private investment and make it really make it more feasible in our partner country. We do also that, and I think this is important, we want to do that also in a way that is more impactful. So going back to the title of this session, but also so focused on certain key priority and certain key projects, much more than we've been doing in the past. So rather than deploying everywhere, but just focusing on some project, and together also with our EU member states, working really together strongly in a Team Europe spirit. So that's what we're trying to do also on the methodology of working, and also with major sort of investments that we have in mind along the communication we issued earlier on Global Gateway. So really starting with really from strategic investment and trying to support those in the sectors I said. So that's what I can say to start with, really sort of shifting also quite a lot of our focus towards supporting investment.
Yeah, thank you. Now let me move to Natasha. So you represent the private sector. And I was just reading some of the work which you guys are doing in the space of agriculture, which is also a very key element of one of the 17 SDG goals. So why don't you share what your organization is focusing on to solve one of the challenges which IPS are facing to, achieve the SDG targets?
Thank you, moderator. Yes, so first of all, thank you for having us. I think it's really exciting to be in a panel with so much diversity from an expertise and sectorial point of view. So hopefully we can showcase different perspectives on the topic. So let me take the responsibility maybe of representing the private sector. I think a few things I wanted on this opening remarks. First of all, maybe I'll structure quickly when opportunities and challenges without going much into the challenge details. But I think we need to remember, at least from a private sector, I think the SDGs was really a critical moment in the international landscape, because the SDGs are in itself transformational. And from a private sector point of view, they are transformation because they help us with the direction. They help us the challenges we know in terms of interlinkage, but from a sustainability strategy point of view, even from a ESG strategy point of view, the SDGs are directional for us. So as representing my organization, Bayer, when we announced our commitments in 2019, our public commitments, that is a result of many years of discussions, we have aligned the vision and the North Star with the SDGs. As an example, and I will focus on the agriculture division, which I represent, but as an example, we have 3 transformational public commitments, one on accelerating climate smart agriculture, and we we strongly believe that commitment is linked with SDG 13, with SDG 17. For example, of course, this is on top of our own operations and our carbon commitments. We really want to enable our farmer customers to reduce GHG emissions and to capture carbon, for example. And we have a direct connection here with the SDGs on top of scientific valid methodologies. A second area is around environmental impact, food system agriculture. We have talked a lot about trade-offs and the environmental aspects of that. We strongly believe that that's connected, for example, with SDG 13 and 15, and that was part of the discussion and part of the North Star. Again, using public developed scientific methodologies by UNEP, for example, when we think on international standards, or the University of Denmark and very important universities consortium, where we actually measure our portfolio and we make and we make portfolio decisions, for example, based on that commitment and scientific valid methodologies. And then maybe the one that I will focus most on this dialogue is around empowering 100 million smallholders by 2030, which we strongly believe, and is part of our reports, that is connected with the SDG 1 and 2. And that's really about tailoring services, driving partnerships where we can tailor service to smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries, thinking about them being more profitable, them being more, them generating business and reducing their risks, and really having access to technology and finance. So it gives a North Star. So I know we have a lot of challenges that were exacerbated by the health crisis that we manage as a society, and economic crisis that we have been through. But this is from a private sector. This is a really important North Star that guides those ESG strategies that are a demand from stakeholders, of course, from not only a business, from a reputational point of view, and our shareholders even. So that's very important from a private sector. There's no way back. We have to go forward in that direction, making the reports transparently and measured. And then maybe quickly before I pause, I think the challenge for us is, of course, as I mentioned, we need to measure, we need to do it transparently, but I guess the SDGs were conceptually driven to guide policy, right, and to guide policy impact. So some of the challenges that we have when we actually talk about measurement and indicators is, from a private sector, where do we fit when things are too much interlinked, public, private, and third-party validation on where the impact really is happening from a societal point of view, from a livelihoods point of view. How can I measure if a technology really improves livelihoods, right? So we need the third-party validation. We need to actually better, let's say, develop that from a private sector point of view, and I think that's something we can do in collaboration with non-private organizations and even public sector. And then maybe finally, I guess, important things in terms of methodology, there is still a challenge in credibility when particularly private sector reports impact indicators. For example, we have reported our TCFD, so the climate finance piece reports. We have, of course, as many of those organizations joined the SBTI. We follow their targets when we think about our own operations, but then when we go on nature, on water, biodiversity, there's a lot of challenges on how we actually, create those measurement methods, make it credible, make it third-party valid. And then I think those are the challenges that we have, and I think this should not hinder us. This should just foster more collaboration and foster more, innovative thinking, so we can make sure that we are responding to societal demands and requests and expectations as needed from a private sector point of view.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll come back to some of the ways we can get more private sector involved in that. So Jenny, so you're an author. So she wrote a book, Solar
Power Finance Without the Jargon.
Without jargon, yes. So it's quite interesting because, the energy is a very key focus along with equality and poverty in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we heard from Joshua, some of the work with International Solar Alliance is doing. So from where you sit in the space of research and you look at the entire world and deal with different stakeholders, what is the work which you guys are doing, which you have observed, which people in the room will find it useful?
So we're incredibly lucky at Bloomberg. Our job is to provide information to the governments, to the financiers, to the big corporates who are making investments. So we get to sit and obsess all day about data, about how much things cost and how much things are worth and how much is being invested. And for a certain sort of person, that's a great job, which I am that sort of person. And it was really good after hearing Nitin's list of things that have gone worse this year to think, well, clean energy transition investment actually went up 27% from 2020 to 2021. And it was also up in 2020. I forget exactly how much. But investment in clean energy and the energy transition has almost always been a record for the 17 years I've been tracking this sector. And one very specific piece of good news for you. Joshua complained that most of the investment last year went into the developed countries, which is true, of course. I'm afraid that's always true. And in general, that doesn't hold back investment in developing countries, though. There was one specific way that it has this year, though. There's been a shortage of solar panels this year because the total amount of polysilicon production in the world is constrained by capacity. And meanwhile, demand has gone absolutely nuts. Demand for solar installations has risen from about 182 gigawatts last year to about 251 gigawatts worldwide. And very particularly in Europe, because our energy crisis is particularly extreme here. And most of this is not subsidy, it's not policy, it's just people looking at their energy bills and going, I think we better do something about this before winter hits. And also in some countries that are not Europe. Lebanon, for example, seems to have bought 50 times as much solar as the year before. Because they're having a massive crisis, which is not good, but they are buying it and it will help. And next year, there is a lot more capacity to make solar panels coming online. There should be roughly double the quantity made as was installed this year. And so we should have plenty of modules able to go to these developing countries. So if you're trying to develop energy projects, microgrids, or anything that relies on solar, in developing countries, next year might be a good year for it to actually happen.
Yeah, thank you. So for the second part of the conversation, I want each one of you to be part of it. I may get one or two people to share their ideas, because what we are going to discuss in the second part is, what has worked in terms of the execution of the SDGs. Is there a need for us to really recalibrate either the goals or the subheadings, or maybe the execution itself, which we need to relook at? Because, as I said, after pause, that is what we need to see. Otherwise, there is no way for us to accelerate that. And then I have a few follow-up questions. So please raise your hand if you want to contribute according to your perspective, if we need to recalibrate the way we are approaching execution on the SDG side. So, from the last part, I think quickly, I just wanted to check with you on the capacity building, Gita. Is in terms of the technology is becoming such a big factor, and we talk about the inclusion and having more women and people into the workforce. Not everybody has access to technology, and the world is evolving faster. Where you do not have access to technology, you may be left behind. So do you think that technology is a very is an enabler or is a disruptor in achieving the sustainable goal for inclusion, as far as the inequalities and employment?
Right, so that is a very big question. And honestly, it's a question, in the ILO, we have a lot of discussions on the future of work. What will the future of work look like? And when I was talking about all of these disruptions, in the labor markets, there have been quite a number of them, and you can call them crises, like the pandemic, which actually has generated a lot of innovations in terms of teleworking, but at the same time raising more, I would say, challenges in relation to work-life balance. So there are all of these disruptions happening in the labor market. And when we are talking about impact investment, and I do want to bring it back to the role of the IPAs. I don't think we are here to discuss, whether the SDGs are still valid or not. I mean, they are an international consensus, that were agreed between all of the member states of the UN. We keep them as a goal, I mean, as very clear goals for 2030. Of course, they are aspirational goals, but they are very, very important. And I think specifically now that we are going through these different kinds of crises, it actually helps us reflect, what is it that we should be doing different to achieve them. And I think that is precisely also why the IPAs, are at a critical moment of reflecting, what it is that we've been doing in the past, investment attraction into our countries, but has this really led to changes in terms of making progress on the SDGs? And that is at a critical moment because we have no time to lose, whether we're talking about the environment, whether we're talking about more and better jobs, whether we are talking about a lot of other important developments at the moment, renewable energies. I mean, it's a very important one at the moment. We see the impact happening every day. So we should be doing things in a different way. And I think within the ILO, there has been, many calls on building back better, and then is it really about building back better, No, it's building forward better, So what is it that we should be doing in a different way? And as I said, when we did the survey, with the IPAs in relation, I mean, as part of our partnership with WAIPA, you mentioned it's on the website of WAIPA, and we really want to thank all of the IPAs who sent back the questionnaires, because we know they are heavily surveyed. Yesterday we had another survey, I think, by our sister agency, UNIDO. So we are really pleased. We had 68 responses from the investment promotion agencies. And it's clearly for them that more and better jobs is extremely important when you talk about investment facilitation, investment attraction. But there are a number of challenges also that the IPAs are facing. It has to do with getting the right data in place, convincing their own, I would say, governments that these kind of linkages really need to be made with national development priorities. There's also the whole development, I think, in relation to responsible business conduct, and I'm very pleased to see that we have a representative of the private sector here. We see that the whole responsible business conduct agenda is becoming increasingly important. So how are the IPAs actually using also this agenda to stimulate more responsible investment, investment that really contributes to or real delivers benefits for the host country where this is happening. And again, we're bringing it back to SDG 8 on inclusive economic growth and decent work for all. So how is it happening? Is it really creating the jobs? Is it helping skilling, including skilling for the future of work? Multinationals can play a really important role in upgrading the local economy, in providing all of these opportunities, in giving indications to the governments on the kind of skills that are needed for the future, for the country to really be part of the global economy and provide all of these opportunities. And I think, there's one quote actually from the survey we did that I think is actually really telling, and it said, there is a clear desire from the IPAs to strengthen their negotiation position with investors by adopting tools and processes that can help them to objectively assess the role of FDI in promoting and contributing to decent work in line with the SDGs, and including through a set of KPIs that clearly make the link to the SDGs. And that is something that we hear, in our conversations with the IPAs, that very often the KPIs do not yet take this fully into account. And I think that is also the role of an organization like the ILO to really help the IPAs in moving into that direction and get the full support of the government in doing that. Because we see a lot of, and I'm just speaking, from my own experience working in many different countries around the world on decent work, is that we often see there is a lack of this policy coherence, right? So we have one left, or we have one side of the government working on certain priorities, and we have another one part of the government working on other priorities. And Some of them are engaging with the private sector themselves, depending on in which country they are investing, have or may have different behaviors, you know. So there's a lot of coherence that is actually needed to come to this collective action and accelerated action to achieve the SDGs.
Yeah.
So,
So I think it's a
yeah.
very fair point you made. I think, you know, the goals are set. We need to look at the approach to solve it rather than to discuss about the goal itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we will actually focus because we have next 20 minutes and, you know, we have this part and then the funding part to come back to. So before Cecil, I come back to you, I just wanted to find out from the audience, is there any good experience, the IPS you have come across where the execution to achieve the SDG goals was very successful because the other people may find it useful? Anybody would like to share? Okay, fine. So in case if you feel like, just raise your hand, I'll visit you guys to do that. So I think if we can keep it like, you know, in next 10 minutes, if we are able to cover this, then we'll come back to funding, which people actually, the investing, which, you know, people care about also. I think, Cecil, from your perspective, in terms of the execution of our approach to meet the SDG goals, do you think we need to recalibrate? If yes, how do you think we can actually do that? What are some of the lessons which IPS can take from that conversation?
Thank you. Maybe a couple of points and building on what Gita was saying on the responsible corporate also behavior. This is also something which we are speeding up or gearing up a little bit our approach as the EU. We have published a proposal this year on corporate sustainable due diligence. So because due diligence has been done voluntary so far and the proposal aims to do it mandatory. But of course you can see it as saying it's a burden, but it's not. We do believe it's not, and it can be turned into an opportunity. And that's also very important for the IPAs here, because it's like when you look at what kind of company and so on from the start, making sure that they have a process in place to look at sustainable aspect being decent work, Gita talked about, but also the environment, and it's incorporated in the way that you are building your corporate operations basically. And it's not, and then due diligence is something that should be embedded, and there are enough guidance and experience so far also the OECD to guide and to make it practicable, implementable by business. Of course, for the smallest business, it's maybe more of a challenge, and that's where also we are developing program also and support to help them in our partner country so that they could put that in place in their operation and then be able to trade and to do also business properly. But I think here it's really on working on the private sector also so that they play their part, increasingly their part in the SDGs. So I think this is something that will come up, but we have already the proposal now, it will have to be implemented. Something else, just to react also wanted to what I was mentioning before, of course, this sort of investing together, private sector with public money, the guarantee, the blending that we have, that is starting. It's still some work to be done, and we see still the investment gap is huge, as you were saying before. If we take one example in Africa for infrastructure, we see that 10% of the fundings it's by the private sector, done by private sector. So we still put a lot of money there where we can get much more and leverage much more in terms of what could be done, because the infrastructure, it's something that is sometimes very basic but needs to be in place for many other things. So that's an area where I think we can still continue and work together. We have the ambition with our new Global Gateway Strategy and the FSD Plus to mobilize up to 300 billion euro by 2027, so before 2030. This is ambitious, but we have the means there to try to get into that, and we hope we can work with FDIs and the private sector to do that.
Yeah, thank you. So just let me check if Joshua is there, if you can join us. Joshua, you're there? I think we'll revisit once we get the connection back with him. So Natasha, I just want to change the track with you for this question. How can IPAs improve the collaboration, or the corporates improve the collaboration with each other so that there is an efficiency in terms of execution to meet the SDG goals? What are one or two ideas on the table?
Thank you. So we alluded a little bit on the comments here. I think the role of IPAs is, and a very important role, is really being the catalyzer where we can attract investments, being the catalyzer of attracting investments where profit, as a private sector representative, profits can be gained by focusing or by identifying opportunities on social and environmental outcomes on top, of course, of the economics, right? And then maybe I'll give a practical example and travel from Geneva to India, because not only I'm very passionate about our work in India, but it's really significant for us from an ESG strategy point of view and from a sustainability point of view. India is one of our key countries from a smallholder's point of view, as everybody could imagine, from an agricultural sector perspective. So not only we've been in India for 125 years, so think about long term, that's one of the challenges as well, balancing short and long-term investments and outcomes from a private sector point of view. But an example I wanted to bring here to the audience as well is in India, not only ours actually is a platform with other partners, but the Sustainable Rice Project. I guess rice for Asia, I hope I think we know that this crop is critical from a food security point of view, of course. But what we are trying to do there with other partners, again, is to switch, and I'll be technical for a second, just to get very concrete because of your question. We want to switch from transplanting rice to directed seed rice, to alternative wetting, drying, to conservation tillage. And I'm using those technical terms because that means that we want to engage farmers to change practices. And why to change practices? Because we believe those practices have, and from the pilots and from the data that we have been gathering for the past decade or so, those practices will have a direct environmental outcome. As an example, a reduction of 2 or 3 tons of methane per hectare, 30–40% of water use reduction per hectare. So those are clear environmental outcomes that then could link back to SDGs and could link back what we expect actually to create additional revenues and additional value proposition to those farmers, not only thinking about how they manage risks on changing practices and do they have the technology available, is that technology tailored for that crop in their country? For example, startups, we are looking to work with startups that tailor machinery, focus on a specific crop and machinery for that country that maybe it's not today on focus. But if you create the system and you think about those systemic challenges and bring the partners on board, we can create the systemic solution that is needed to accelerate projects like that. So thinking about that environmental outcome and then hoping that that environmental outcome will create additional value and economic value, and I mean additional cash for farmers first, and then that will generate value in the system, in the end-to-end through the value chain. So I think this is an example where green investments and where shareholders expect as well, and then I think IPAs can be a catalyzer of that and then help us to measure from a national point of view, from a national priority point of view. Think again about India. Water is a critical issue. So if that has a high value, so IPAs can really be the catalyzer and the facilitator, getting private and public sector who is interested on getting this to scale, because scale is the main point for us to be transformational. So get this to scale and then attract investors that really want to contribute, and then do the transparent third-party validated measurements, and then really contribute to the policy goals that that country has. So I think IPAs, as we all know, have a critical and continue to have a critical role on accelerating this type of investments.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's a good input on the private-public partnership. So Jenny, let me come to you on the finance side. Let's quickly go through that in the spirit of time, because I thought we will have enough time to conclude, but the topic is so intense. We have a lot of points to cover. So I think on the finance side, the FDI is something which people in the room actually care about also, and that's one area of your interest. So what can we do to accelerate the flow of funds in the developing and emerging markets in the clean space? There's 1 or 2 ideas, then we just move across in the individual areas where we focus on what can we do and help IPAs in terms of attracting investment. So let's start with you.
provide good information about where can be invested in the country, which will, and what returns can reasonably be expected, and what the risks are there. I have a lot of financial clients who their job is to make these investments. They want to find them, but they can't invest if it's going to all go south. And their main criterion for is it not going to work is what they want to know is, will it generate electricity? Will they get paid for the electricity? Will the electricity get to people? And I think IPAs do a fantastic job. Sometimes, from the financial perspective, they don't necessarily provide that information as a priority.
Yeah. So, Joshua, you're there? I think we so kind of unable to connect with him. So, Natasha, from your perspective, what can we do to get private sector to provide more capital and work with IPAs to move the needle?
I gave an example. I think let's think about mechanisms, right? One example that when we identify a project that meets, as we are talking about the transformation, those environmental, social outcomes with where profits and transformation can be made. I think identifying those projects, for example, use of, and I'm here from an industry point of view, right? So a technology provider. So IPAs, which already happen, and we have great benchmark around the world, but IPAs that could help us to identify, or the use of blended finance, for example, or guarantee schemes, for example, that combine with our technical expertise, with our technical know-how, our funding in terms of investment as well, and then how to meet that to development finance organizations. So being that facilitator can really unlock different type of investment and really create the strategic partnerships that we need to fill the gap from a technology point of view, from an expertise, from a know-how, but as well from a finance and from a risk management point of view, which is so important. So I think that's a concrete example that the IPA is the facilitator, the catalyzer in the countries for private investments.
Yeah. Cecil, so I think a lot of money coming to the clean energy. We need to really figure out how we can get the similar kind of money into the work which you and Gita are doing. If we can quickly share that.
Yes, you're talking about energy, right? The question?
So basically, how do we get more capital coming into the different spheres of SDG goals?
I think I was very happy to hear what Natasha was saying, and the link with IPA playing a role also to link with the DFIs. Because we hear from the EU, we give the money to the DFIs. The DFI are the one on the market which are talking to the local banks, to the pipeline operator, building the pipeline. We can help, of course, and I think that's what we are also trying to do in the future, to help, to support for building the pipeline. Sometimes the DFI do not see, especially if you talk about SME support. They don't have the links and they don't know which project to support. And here the IPA could play a very good role because you have the connection with actors, private sector coming to you, wanted maybe to be interested, maybe they don't have enough funds and so on. And you have the DFI on the other side who have the means because we help them with guarantees. So you can make a very good interface between the two. So I very much agree with what Natasha was saying. So on our side, working more on the pipeline or technical building, capacity building, and getting this project, which are sometimes they're maturing a little bit more so that they are ready to get the access to finance and so on. That we are putting also quite a lot of focus, especially for SMEs, because then they're very, very small and they need to mature and so on. So we need to support, to have that before it can be brought into blending and guarantee mechanism. And I think also what I wanted to say as the last thing is something where I think the IPA is also very important because we talk more and more about value chain approach also. If you look at a country like Africa, to develop really regional, continental value chains, but really put the value addition also in the country, starting there with the raw material and then processing and blah, blah, maybe in another country. And then IPA are very well placed to kind of support and see where the value chains elements can come in, where you can get the different interests and the different business and building, helping us to build really this process on the ground and making it a reality.
Yeah, thank you. Gita?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is anymore, but honestly, I think the IPAs play a really critical role in driving, finding, of course, the partnerships with the private sector because they are basically the investors. but making sure that it really brings the benefits for the host country also of these investments. And it's about this partnership, right? I mean, but it's then, you know, steering also that investment in a way that indeed it generates those benefits for the host country. And it is, you know, by looking for what are the vulnerable groups that actually should be, you know, steered towards employment opportunities, certain regions, you know, that needs to be further developed as part of inclusive economic development, stimulating the linkages with the local enterprises so that more also happens from that side. And I think there, as I said, it's an important opportunity to really reflect by the IPAs, you know, in how far it is happening, what are the kind of methodologies they are maybe missing to really start measuring, you know, what are the current benefits of a lot of the FDI projects that are coming into our country. Are they really aligned with the national development priorities? You know, what are the kind of outreach also the IPAs need to do, maybe to other ministries, to have this kind of national dialogues on is the FDI flows, are they coming to our countries, are they going into the right? With the existing investors in the country, how can we scale up? You know, I think, Natasha, again, your example of being in India for such a long time, I mean, you must be a really trusted partner, so how can you further stimulate those collaborations? I think that is a very, very important role of the IPAs. And just in our own work of the ILO, you know, we normally work with ministries of labor, we work with employers, organizations with the trade unions, and we are reaching more and more out also to the IPAs. And, you know, we have our specific instrument, which is this Declaration on Multinational Enterprises and Social Policy, really to stimulate the positive contribution of multinationals to decent work. And we have systems of national focal points in the countries. And I just want, I don't know whether the Ghana is here in the room, but actually among the focal points for the promotion of this instrument, we don't only have the Ministry of Labor, the Employers Organization, the Trade Union, but also the Ghana Investment Promotion Center as a focal point. And that shows how, in a way, this coherence at the national level and the linkages between FDI, more and better jobs, and how this really should work together. Again, this is from the ILO perspective, of course, you know, there are the other, you know, the environment, but this is really, really critical in moving forward on the SDGs.
Yeah. No, I think it's quite, if I can summarize the conversation, what we had so far, I think the time is short in terms of achieving the goal. The execution is very complex and difficult. And the only way we can actually achieve this, and the word which you use is the collaboration. So I think all the stakeholders have to come together, share, learn, and then figure out how to move forward. And I think also what is more important for us to really broaden the horizon of that money is not going into only one or two areas because of, you know, returns, good returns, but we have to look beyond that and ensure that all the 17 SDGs are getting enough attention and capital from all the stakeholders for us to really, truly move the needle when we get into 2030. So we are running short of time, so I have to apologize that we are unable to take questions and also some of the other things which we wanted to discuss. But I think we got some very good thoughts as to how to move forward, and that was a goal. And we will continue the conversation as we move out into the coffee area, so feel free to reach out to them to take the conversation forward. But at this point of time, I would like to thank Joshua and my 4 panelists present over here for giving a deep insight into how to move the needle to achieve the goal by 2030. Thank you, and thank you to the audience as well.